in the organization, we're always like, oh, I love Jehovah. Yeah, we obey Jehovah. You know, you would never hear a witness saying we obey Jesus or we love Jesus. And if you said that, they're like, oh, wait a minute, he's getting all, you know, Southern Baptist on us, you know, like he's Pentecostal now or something like that. Like if you say you love Jesus in the organization or you want to obey Jesus, it's like, where did he come from? Like, or what's he been listening to?
You're listening to The Critical Thought, where we challenge our listeners to use critical thinking when examining the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Hi, this is Lady C. Welcome back to our channel. In the upcoming podcast, we'll be talking with Paul. He's a former elder and Bethelite from Toronto, Canada. Also served at the branches in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. He went to couple school, served as a special pioneer, gave talks on assemblies and conventions, as well as taught elder school. So he's been there, done that, done everything. And he has a lot of interesting experiences to share. So I highly recommend that you listen to the entire video. And not only that, be sure to share this video with other people. Either tweet it out on your Twitter feeds or share it on your Facebook pages. But do share this video. Without further ado, here's Paul. Okay, we are here.
Hey, how you doing this morning?
1 second, I just gotta get this window. I can see part of your faces, but not all of it.
Okay.
How's it going? Can you see me?
Not yet.
Trying to, we're just kind of chilling out here. Yeah, well, anyway, thanks for reaching out, connecting with us and everything.
Yeah, you guys seem like such a cool couple, and when you served in Bethel and you hear other people talking about their Bethel experiences, it's like, you just connect. You're just like, yeah, that's exactly what happened, and
right.
Like so it's kind of fun that way,
Exactly.
We call it telling war stories.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, sometimes it seems like that,
I was born in Quebec City, and then my parents moved to Toronto when I was little, like really little, like a year and a half. So I grew up in Toronto.
I had a chance to visit the Bethel and the Canadian Bethel when I was at Bethel.
Yeah, what was your impression when you went there? What year was that?
It was real nice. Nice place. We were kind of surprised because they had the commissary. I mean, we was actually shocked that they had the commissary at the Canadian branch, and it was open. You just leave money behind. and I remember one of the governing body had went there, I guess about a month later, and he came back to Brooklyn and he dogged us. He says, we can't do that here at Yellowstone. We'll leave no money behind.
We'll go broke. We won't break even. All the Bethelites that, their monthly allowance run out. Well, you know what? I'll put something in next.
I'll put something next month.
Oh, that is funny. So now, were you born into the organization or?
Yeah. In fact, I kind of used to be proud that I was baptized twice. Because my mom got baptized when I was in her womb.
She was pregnant.
Oh my God.
7 months, I don't know, 6 or 7 months pregnant with me. I guess it must have been a big thing at the assembly, a pregnant woman getting baptized, right?
Baby being baptized.
Yeah.
I like that.
I'm twice as holy, man. I got baptized twice.
That is funny, twice as holy. Way to go.
Oh, yeah.
You got to leave the organization twice.
Oh, yeah.
So then what started you on your path to all of these different things that you did in the organization? What started all that?
Well, serving in Bethel, especially when I served in Toronto Bethel, and you get to know the brothers. I mean, the family there was about 400 at the time. And it's true, you have your morning worship table. It's always the same people. But, at lunch and at dinner time, you get to sit with all the different people, with the branch committee members. And you get to rub shoulders with them. At the dinner table, too, a lot of times people would hang around, right, because it wasn't that rush to get back to work. And you'd talk and stuff like that. And I came to realize that actually some of the branch committee members had very undesirable personalities at times. I'm not saying all of them. I mean, some of them were nice. It was a mixed bag. And it was just like, how does someone maybe who's ornery or so imposing ever get to such a high position? Because it just causes more damage when you let someone go further up, right? And everyone just kind of bears and deals with it, and they just say, well, yeah, Jehovah will take care of it if he needs to, and if Jehovah doesn't see it's necessary, well, then I've just got to put up with it, kind of thing, right? So you'd see things that would just kind of raise your eyebrows. It got even worse because, like, when I was sent to Haiti, again, when you're in a smaller branch, you get to see everything, you hear everything, you know everything that's going on. It's pretty hard for people to keep things quiet. And you become close friends even with the branch committee members. Like, that's kind of hard in a larger branch because there's just so many people. And you're in a small branch, and then you come to see that, you know, they say it's Jehovah directing the organization, and you see men making decisions. You're saying, you know, it's the man who's making these decisions. It's the man who's directing these things. So I had these things that, you know, raised my eyebrows. There was things in the Watchtower too that was said that I was just like, that's not right. That's not right. And it wasn't until, well, it was probably, I guess one thing that really kind of shook my faith, it was an article on the first resurrection. It's already begun. That was the title of the article. The first resurrection already underway. And I was serving in the Dominican Bethel at that time. And because I served in Haiti for 4 years, I served in the Dominican Republic for 4 years. And I remember, like, just really reading that article, and it was just so full of all these interpretations and anti-typical things. And in the end, at the last part of the Watchtower, there was this questions from readers. And it basically asked, one of the questions asked was, after Armageddon, will there be any anointed ones left on earth? And the governing body obviously sat and thought about what are we going to respond, right? And because they raised the question, well, maybe some anointed ones will have to finish their earthly course after Armageddon. Like, basically, they'll die of old age after Armageddon. And at the end of that question from readers, it says, will there be any anointed left on earth after Armageddon to finish their earthly course? And the answer was, we don't know. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. This is the governing body. They're supposed to be anointed by Spirit, and they can't figure out if there's going to be any of these anointed ones left on earth after Armageddon. And yet, you know, I read in Matthew chapter 24, where it says when Jesus finally returns, he's going to gather all the chosen ones from the four ends of the earth. And it was like, he's going to gather them. There's not going to be anyone left here after Armageddon of that group. So I remember having this conversation with this young brother at an ice cream shop. A young brother named Samir, a really good friend of mine in the past. Obviously, now we don't have a relationship. But I remember telling him, you know, because it kind of came up about, you know, will people in the resurrection marry, right? And I told him, I said, it's ridiculous for them to think that moment that Jesus was talking about, that he was talking about people coming back on earth. I said, they're going to have a whole earth just full of single people running around that can't get married, right? Can't have family. That just doesn't make sense. So, and I said, you know, and Jesus said they're going to be like angels, you know, neither male or female. So wait a minute, like that's got to get you thinking, wait, these people resurrected on earth are not going to be male or female? Like, what are we going to have? Some new species, like mutants walking around? I'm like, Jesus is talking about people being resurrected to heaven, right? And I said to him, I said, the governing body is wrong in that. And he's like, what do you mean? You're saying the governing body? I was like, the Bible says this. So if they're saying something different, either one day they're going to have to correct it, or if they never correct it, I'm sorry, they're just wrong about that, right? And he's like, well, I'll wait for a Watchtower to come out, right? Which is the answer, right? You show someone, another witness, something in the Bible, and they're like, I'll wait for the Watchtower to come out. So that was another thing that really bothered me, is that you could share something from the Bible with somebody, and they would see it. They would look at it, and they'll say, yeah, I can see your point, but I'll wait for the Watchtower to come out. So in other words, it wasn't enough for the Bible to say something for them to accept it. They had to hear it from a Watchtower in order to believe in it. And I was just like, wait a minute here. Like, the whole reason I thought we were witnesses because we wanted to stick to the Bible. And here the Bible is saying something. You're saying, no. Sorry, that's not enough for me to see it in the Bible. I got to see it in a Watchtower to believe it. Right. So like that was just that was one of the things that really got me thinking. And then sure enough, like, I don't know, 7 years later, they come out and they're like, oh yeah, Jesus said in Matthew 24 that, he's going to gather up the children. So there's not going to be any of them left on earth. And I'm just like, wait a minute. They sat and they read over that Watchtower and they thought about the response. And out of all of these brothers that are supposedly anointed by Spirit, they couldn't have just read that one verse and come to that conclusion. And they said, we don't know. And I'm thinking, they're no different than us elders that are trying to understand the Bible and that don't understand it completely. So why are we hanging on their every word when we've got a Bible in our hands? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, like, why are we waiting for them to come out and say something? And then, of course, then there's that big issue. Well, you're going ahead. You're going ahead of them. And I don't know. So there was a couple of things that built up. And then in 2014, I committed a serious sin, and I had to go in front of a judicial committee. And I mean, maybe later on I can explain it to you, details, because I mean, I'm ashamed of it, but there's just, to me, there's no sense hiding what you do, right? I mean, so when I went through that judicial committee, it was the first time I had to sit on the other side. And I had sat as an elder, I don't know how many, dozens and dozens of judicial committees. It seems like in the Haiti and Dominican, or in Dominican, there was just so many more than in Canada. I don't know why. But the first time you have to sit on the other side and be judged by three men who don't know what you're feeling, and you're telling them something and they want to believe something else. I experienced firsthand the frustration and the pain and the suffering that every other witness that had to go through judicial committee had to go through. And I realized that it was just not from God. This was to have three men who don't understand what you're going through, to have to sit and judge you. They're not helping you, they're judging you. That's what it is. And then afterwards, I mean, I was reproved. And over the next couple months, I guess they were kind of watching, and I was depressed. Like I was down and out. I had, when I served as an elder, I always tried to be loving and kind. And I really wanted to set a good example. Like that was always my number one thing. I want the brothers to see in me a good example, because there were a lot of elders out there that were just hardliners. They wanted to make up arbitrary rules all over the place. They wanted to jump into people's personal lives. And so I kind of wanted to be the opposite and to be that kind of opposing force, because you have elders that are more flexible and softer and all the rest of it. And then you have other ones that are like, apply the law. We got to be hard on these brothers because we got to keep them in line. If we don't, things are going to get out of control. So for me, I was really discouraged that I had done something that had caused, suffering to those around me, and been a bad example. And, I was in a depression. And I explained to the elders that, when you sin and that you've not just sinned against maybe those in your family or set a bad example in the congregation, you sinned against, you've done something that God told you, don't do this because it's going to cause you harm. And you go and you do it, right? I said, the only way I can compare it is like if you cut off your own legs, right? And you can't walk and you're bleeding and you're in trauma. And the elders are basically telling you, you got to get up and walk. You got to get up and walk. And you don't have any desire to walk. You don't have any desire to get up. You're down and out. And there's no shepherding of someone who's, maybe done something wrong and is feeling these feelings. They meet with them once, and then every once in a while the elder will come around, hey, how you doing? And that's it. Like you just maybe gone through probably the worst thing in your life, and they're telling you to get up and walk, and you don't feel like walking. So a couple months after I was reproved, there was some things that went on, and the circuit overseer came around, and he had said to the other elders, he's like, well, you know, maybe Paul really isn't repentant. And I get this, you know, because what we see over the last 3 months is nothing to be impressed about, right? Like, they were expecting me to just get up and be all this fireball. And so I have this visit by 2 elders, and they're like, Paul, we need to meet with you. And I'm like, well, what for? Well, because, you know, the circuit overseer feels that we need to re-examine your case. And I'm like, re-examine? And they're like, well, what does that mean? And they were like, well, you know, there's doubt as to whether really the decision we made a few months ago maybe was the best decision, and we really need to sit down with you again, you know, in view of what's gone on over the last 2-3 months, because we just need to meet with you, right? And I'm like, is this a judicial committee again, or is you just need to talk because the 2 of you are here? I mean, let's talk. And they're kind of like beating around the bush, and they're like, well, yeah, we need to meet with you in a judicial committee, right? And so I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever. You know, you guys want to meet? Let's meet. You know, like, but I was depressed at the time. I just wanted someone to grab my hand and say, Paul, you know what? I'm here with you. You know, don't think this is the end of the world. I'll be there with you. You want to just go out and do something? Don't get too down on yourself. You're fine, man. You'll get over this. You'll find a way. Something like that. Just, you know, some sort of encouragement. But there was no encouragement. It was just like, we're reopening your case. So I went back into the judicial committee again, and basically, like, they explained from the outset, this is not a new judicial committee, because I hadn't done anything new wrong, like to warrant a new judicial committee. They're like, we're reopening the case and the decision that was made 3 months ago to just examine your situation in light of what you've done over the last 2-3 months. Because we really don't see there's a lot of works befitting repentance, because they wanted to see it get me do a lot of stuff. So the circuit overseer had arranged, he didn't want anyone that was close to me on the judicial committee. So he called in elders from outside. And he called in these 2 guys that the society calls in the, you know, the cleanup, these elders that, you know, they know they're going to be policy men. They're going to do what the CO says. The CO had already told them to disfellowship me before they even met with me. Like, that's the thing. I was in a small town. Word got around at this point. And I already knew they were coming to disfellowship me. Word got out. So imagine how that is when you know that the brothers coming to meet with you are coming to disfellowship you before they even have a chance to meet with you and listen to you and examine your case. So I'm sitting in front of 2 guys that I knew them from assemblies, because, you know, when I gave parts in assemblies, they had parts too. We'd see each other behind the stage. They give nice talks or whatever. But anyway, they're in a sense a bit of strangers to me. And yeah, sure enough, their decision was, you know, Paul, we haven't seen enough over the last few months to see that really you're doing anything to show that you're sorry for what you did. And I was like, you know what, if that's the decision from Jehovah, because at that time I thought, okay, well, this is Jehovah disciplining me. I felt that, you know, I'd done something so terrible. I should be stoned. You know, I felt that, you know, here I am. It's true. I did the crime. I got to do the time. And, you know, if it's Jehovah that decides that I need to be disfellowshipped, fine, I accept that, right? So I accepted it. But then afterwards, I felt so bothered that I had done what I did. It bothered me so much. I was like, why did this happen? Why did I get to this point? I really had to examine myself. And I realized that as an elder, I was special pioneering at the time. I had been through couples school, and I was just worn out. I was helping everybody else. I had, 12, 13 Bible studies. I was doing Bible studies here, there, and everywhere. I was preparing talks. We had just formed a new congregation. So I was pretty well the school overseer, and then I had a part in the service meeting, and then I'd conduct the Watchtower, because it was a new language group that had just become a congregation. So I was just doing everything for everybody else, and I wasn't paying attention to my own relationship with God. And I wasn't even spending enough time with my wife. It was just, you're told to do more. You got to save lives. Armageddon's coming. We're going to run out of time if we don't get to these people. So there's this rush to be helping all these people. And you feel bad if you stay home because someone's life depends on you. That's what you're told, and you feel that, if you don't get out there and you're not trying to do more, if you're an auxiliary pioneer and you're not trying to be a regular pioneer, then you're not concerned about people. And if you're a regular pioneer and you don't want to be a special pioneer, well, then you're not concerned about people, because you should be wanting to do more. So I went through basically a burnout, and that was why I just became, I lost sight of what was really important, which was my own health, my own spirituality, my own relationship with my wife. And so I had to re-examine myself, and I started reading the Bible again, and it was totally different. I was reading the Bible, and things are just jumping out of the page at me, things that really I'd never seen before. My waking up to the organization was not as a result of watching YouTube videos or reading Crisis of Conscience, because actually at that point when I had been disfellowshipped, I was like, you know what? I'm in a position where I have nobody's help. I'm all on my own. I don't want to get myself into trouble. So I'm going to stay away from anything that might affect my relationship with God. And so I was like, I'm not going to listen to any of this apostate stuff. I'm not going to I'm going to be careful about my relationship with other people. I don't want to get myself involved with another woman, et cetera, et cetera. So I was actually being really, really careful about everything. And so I just wanted to read my Bible and figure things out. And that's what woke me up. I was reading, scriptures, and I was like, wait a minute, I was doing things all wrong. Perhaps one of the things that really hit me hard was Luke 15. The thing where Jesus talks about the 99 sheep and the lost sheep, right? And as an elder, JT, we're told, you too, Lady C, we're told all the time that the elders are the shepherd, and that, their work on behalf of the brothers is that work of the sheep, right? Taking care of the brothers, right? And, they talk about that shepherd going up and down hills and spending sleepless nights under the rain looking for the sheep. And they talk about how the elders, working on behalf of the congregation, that's the application, right? Well, I analyzed it, and maybe my analysis is wrong. You guys can have, you can correct me if I'm wrong or have your own opinion. But this is what I got out of it. What told me as an elder, I was doing everything wrong, according to the way I was taught. The shepherd's concern was not with the 99. It was not the 99. He left the 99, right? His concern was for that one sheep. And it's funny how the organization will always tell you, oh yeah, the lost sheep, those are the inactive ones, right? Or those are the ones that are getting weak and they're kind of straying, right? They're never going to tell you it's a disfellowshipped one, right? It's always the applications, inactive ones, right? But then Jesus goes on to say at the last part of it, he says there's more joy in heaven over one person that repents than over 99 that don't need to repent. So I'm realizing, wait a minute, Jesus is saying this one lost sheep, it represents a person who's not repentant. And because the shepherd has been trying to help him, he comes to his senses. So if the one sheep, it represents a sinner that's unrepentant, I started thinking, well, wait a minute. What do we do in the organization with unrepentant sinners? We boot them out. We kick them out. We don't go looking for them. We don't go trying to help them. You don't hear about, trying to help disfellowshipped ones. Because why is someone disfellowshipped? You can look at the magazine. The bottom line is they weren't repentant. Now, they could have been repentant when you did the judicial committee. But then, you have all these questions in the elders book and old articles that tell you, well, you need to kind of doubt the repentance if they might have been doing it for a while. It doesn't matter if they're bawling in tears and they came to you voluntarily and they're like, you know what, this has been weighing on my conscience. I've sinned against God. I've sinned against the congregation. And they've got all this repentance, but you know what? Oh, wait, you're telling me you did this for 2 or 3 months? Or you've had this going on for 6 months? No, sorry, we can't believe you're repentant. But anyways, going back to it, that example, I was just like, we expel people who are repentant instead of trying to help them. And that's when I remembered a conversation I had with this elder at, it was actually, he was after a kingdom ministry school, and we were just kind of talking informally. And he was talking about the discussions or arguments he had had with other elders, because there's a whole idea of bringing someone to repentance. And some elders are like, it's not the time during the judicial committee to be bringing someone into repentance. They should have come to their own conclusion. In other words, we're not there to help them repent. It's either they on their own feel repentant or not. It's not up to us. And this brother felt that, wait a minute, we should probably meet with them a couple times. We should probably have a couple conversations over a period of a couple weeks, just to see if maybe anything's sinking in, maybe if anything that we're saying to them is having any sort of effect, rather than literally you grab the guy, you pull him in the back room with a judicial committee, and if in 1 or 2 hours you don't see progress or you don't see what you want to see, well, that's it. He's out, and he's out for at least a year, right? So, you know, he brought out a point that we don't help people in judicial committee. We're told that, in fact, in the elders book, that it shouldn't be necessary to meet multiple times with the person. That it should, as elders, you should be able to determine right there and then. And so I realized that's totally wrong. Like, someone just sinned. If you're going to help them, why are you trying to judge? It's either in or out. That's what you're trying to determine. Does he stay in the congregation, or do we put him out? It's not you're not taught that that's the moment to try to really help the person. There's this rush to come to a decision. You know, I don't know, JT, did you ever see the video that was released to help elders make decisions? Well, you were probably out of the organization by then, but it's like a sample judicial committee with a young fellow that's committed fornication.
Yes, I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was still an elder when those videos came out, and we would go over and over those videos. They would analyze it in the Kingdom Ministry School, and you know, one of the things that's really brought out by the governing body is that when the brother first confesses a sin, at the next meeting, you got to arrange a judicial committee. In other words, you got to quickly determine, what are we going to do with this guy, right? If it was someone that needed, if the true, you know, responsibility is to help the person, well, then what's the rush? Why not find the elder that's the best friend of this brother? Because he's the one that's going to have the most results. He's the one that's going to reach us out. That brother commits, and if there's anyone he's going to listen to, he's going to listen to the elder on the body. That's his best friend. In other words, that he feels closest to. So why doesn't that brother visit him and help him? You know, and then when you see there's this rush to make the committee, not to help him, it's to judge him. And then when they're selecting the committee, there is a brother that was the mentor of this brother, and they were close, and you show all these pictures of them together, and he's like, you know, brothers, you know, it might affect my judgment. They're like, yeah, that's true. You know, you wouldn't be a good person to be on the committee because you might actually show love to this guy. You know, it's like, you know, like after I understood Luke 15, I was just like, all of these things are just wrong. And I mean, I'm talking about committees where obviously we're not dealing with something sensitive like child abuse, right? Where you have an abuser who's actually a rapist in your congregation. I'm talking about, you know, okay, a young man's committed fornication, or some guy, you know, got drunk or something like that.
Caught
right?
smoking or something.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, wait a minute, the one person that he might listen to that might reach his heart, you're going to take him out of the committee. And I'm just like, that just doesn't make sense. And I know in my case, when I was depressed and had a hard time at just thinking clearly, it was actually the elder that I felt closest to on the body that said something to me as we were sitting behind the house in this little workshed area. He said something to me, and that really hit me hard. And it made me think about something, right? And I'm just thinking, like, if you have a resistance towards an elder, why are you going to listen to him? You're going to want, I mean, it's way better to arrange someone that's going to reach this person's heart if you're really trying to help them. And so that, you know, that was another thing that just came out, was that there's a rush to form a judicial committee when maybe there's no emergency. the person came forward. They told you they're in shambles. You know what? Let's assign a brother, his best friend, that's got, you know, something good to say. Let's have him go visit him. You know what? Maybe we don't need to do anything beyond that, right? But it's just rush, and then the one person that could reach his heart, nope, got to take him out because we don't want him influencing the decision. And you know, another thing too is I came to realize, like, I sat on a lot of judicial committees, and I actually went over almost every single one that I could remember. And there was one with this sister, and it made me feel so bad because it was, she had, you know, committed a sin for the second time. You know, and you know, JT, you might relate to this, and you know, if you share this with others, they'll maybe relate to it if they were elders. That, you know, you do one sin one time, and then within a year you do it again. Well, then you're going to get a heavier discipline the second time because obviously you didn't learn the first time. So if you got a reproof the first time, pretty well the second time, what's coming?
And get this fellowship.
Yeah, yeah, and you know. We had this sister come forward, and she, you know, she had done this thing for the second time, and she had come forward voluntarily, and I was a new elder at that time, and I was selected to be the chairman, which to me was just like, you know, you're supposed to take the lead in a judicial committee. You never done one before, or maybe you've only done one or two, and I didn't really know, like, what do we do, right? And there was a circuit overseer in Bethel. He was a circuit overseer who got pulled into Bethel, and he was in the same congregation as me, and he was kind of the one who took me under his wing to show me how to do things as an elder, right? So I had this circuit overseer that had been in the field for, you know, 15 years as a circuit overseer. Now he's in Bethel, and he's in the same congregation as me, and he's showing me the ropes, right? So, you know, he shows me these articles. There was this article from the 80s about, is it wickedness or is it weakness? You know, and he told me, you got to make a photocopy of this article and keep it in your elder's book, right? Because it's got some good things for you to ask, right? So you can know if this person, you know, was being wicked or if they were just weak, right? And then, you know, all of that thing that it's not specified in the elder's book, but there's this culture that even though it's not written on a piece of paper, all the elders say it. In other words, if the discipline didn't have its effect the first time, well, you got to come in with something stronger the second time. You know, you won't find that written, but it's the culture. It's talked among the elders. It's kind of like the oral law, you could say. Yep. Right. So in this case, you know, we decided to disfellowship the sister, right? And you know, she was bawling her eyes out, and I'd see her at meetings, and you know, I felt sorry for her, but I felt, based on the way I was trained, that was the way to do things. And that was the only option if she was going to learn, right? Was to, you know, hit her with something harder so that she learns that, no, you're not supposed to do that. And it was funny because after I realized that when someone, especially when they voluntarily come forward, they're looking for help. They're not looking for you to get put out. They're going to the elders because they're saying, I want help. And when you disfellowship them, you actually prohibit them from getting any help. You know, if there were any brothers or sisters in the congregation that wanted to encourage that person, they're not allowed to talk to them. They're not allowed to say, hey, you know what, don't give up. They're not allowed to have these conversations. They can't get help. They're put in a cage, and anyone that would try and help them, they're threatened to be put in the cage too if they try to help them. And, you know, the elders the organization will very quickly say, oh, no, we help disfellowship ones. You know, we have this program every new service year that the elders got to sit down, and they're going to go down that list of all the disfellowship ones in their territory. But here's the catch, because I did this for many years, right? You go to the Kingdom Ministry, I think it is, or one of the letters to the elders, and it's this, again, now in this case, I wouldn't call it oral law, but I'll call it oral law just because it's not in the Bible. It's, you know, the society's laws, right? And they're like, to consider which disfellowship ones would be deserving of a visit. And in other words, if you feel at all that this disfellowship person is not deserving of a visit, sorry, off the list, man. We're not going to visit that one, right? Like, if you heard that disfellowship person maybe was a little bit resentful over what was done, or maybe they're a little hostile towards the witnesses. Now, no, you're not going to visit them. That's not going to be a visit worth it. They got to be one of these disfellowship ones that's just kind of wallowing, that's not going to, discotheques, not doing this, not doing that. Because you know what? If they're doing things like, as we would say in the world, no, sorry, we got to wait until they're calm and doing nothing, and then we're going to pay them a visit. And when you visit them, you're told the visit is not to be lengthy. You're told the visit is just to remind them that the door is always open. And, afterwards I thought about it. I was like, wait a minute. There's this fellowship one. He knows the door is always open. They don't lock the doors of the kingdom up. Well, these days maybe they do because of security reasons. But you're telling them something they already know. And, of course, you're telling them that to come back to Jehovah, you got to start coming back to meetings again. And again, from what I read in the scriptures, it was just a whole life of Jesus came to life to me. And what he taught had so much importance to me. And it was never about coming back to an organization. It was about coming back to our Creator, coming to Jesus. That's another thing that I could go on about probably for hours, is that when you read the scriptures, it's so clear in the Gospels that Jesus is saying, come to me. He even says many times, if you obey me. He says, if you love me. And yet in the organization, we're always like, oh, I love Jehovah. Yeah, we obey Jehovah. You would never hear a witness saying, we obey Jesus or we love Jesus. And if you said that, they're like, oh, wait a minute. He's getting all, Southern Baptist on us, like he's Pentecostal now or something like that. Like if you say you love Jesus in the organization or you want to obey Jesus, it's like, where did he come from? Like, or what's he been listening to? So like for me, that was another thing that kind of it came to life. And I realized how Jesus treated people. He was criticized for having meals with sinners and tax collectors. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. These weren't people of the nations, because Jesus said, I didn't come for the people of the nations. These were Jews. They had the law. So let's just call them, servants of Jehovah, if we're going to use the jargon of the organization, right? These were the ancient Jehovah's Witnesses, right? They had God's laws. They were God's people. And these sinners had been cast out. So they were the disfellowship ones. They were the ones that, it was a very closed community, the Jewish community. And if you did something to piss off one of the Pharisees, or you didn't go along with their oral laws that they added on top, or you did some sin or repeated some sin, well, then you were out. Jesus was eating with them. And no, I don't think Jesus was, between you and I don't think those were his closest friends that he was just hanging out with all the time. But like he didn't have this fear or this, I'm not going to go near them, or they got to clean up their act before I'm going to have a relationship with them, or before I show any sort of interest in them. And I was just like, everything that we were doing in the organization towards people that had made mistakes was exactly what the Pharisees did back in the day. And Jesus did not go by those rules of the Pharisees. He was completely different. And I just thought, you know what? We all make mistakes. So why are we putting things on, well, that's a serious sin, well, that's a not so serious sin? Like we're starting to set up these levels, and if you're guilty of a serious sin, well, then you're worse than I am. When really, you know what, we're all like little grass, we're all on the same level, So for me, it was just seeing how Jesus treated people, especially those that made mistakes. He didn't give up on them. He showed an interest in them. And then just what the organization says they do and what's actually done, there's such a giant gap. We didn't help disfellowship ones. And let me give you an example, if you don't mind me talking.
Oh, go on, keep talking.
Before I forget, though, that one sister that I said that we disfellowship because she had repeated the sin, and I felt terrible about it afterwards because I realized we didn't help her, we just made it worse. I opened a Facebook account for the first time in my life. I don't know, it was back in 2016, because I wanted to try and find her. Because I'm in Canada, she's in the Dominican. I don't know if she came back to the organization. I don't know if she's still out. But I figured, well, if I want to find someone, I got to look on social media to see if I can find her. So I went looking for her, didn't find her. So I closed my Facebook account. So then, again, it never left my mind. I'd even prepared a letter and to send to her. So then I opened a Facebook account about a month ago just to check again. So this is now 3 years later. And I check again, and she's there. So I wrote a letter of, apologizing and asking for her to forgive me. And I explained, that, we're following policy, but it wasn't really the way Jesus Christ was taught us to be. And there's no excuse for me to say I was just following policy. I really did the wrong thing. And I said it, it's been weighing on my mind for all these years. So I sent it off to her. After I sent it, then I realized that she put some pictures up and ones that her at a convention. So, and it was a convention for this year, love never fails. So, yeah, well, you know what? It's her choice. I got to respect that. If she decided to go back, if that's what she needed the people that, maybe she had a lot of friends and family she wanted to get back, and that's where she wanted to be. That's fine. But I felt good that I was able to send that message off, because that's another thing I realize is that if you've done someone wrong, you gotta apologize, man. You gotta apologize. And that was another thing I didn't see in the organization. You don't see them apologizing for things that have caused people harm. And I remember when I was little, I was born in the early 70s. When I was just a little toddler, like 4 or 5 years old, my parents used to have families over for picnics and the barbecue from the congregation. And I remember hearing in on discussions, right? And it didn't sink in, but I remember little things. I remember them talking about 1975. I remember they had a barbecue in our backyard, and there was all these families, and that subject came up because it was still the late 70s. It was only like a year or two later, right? So, and then I also remember them having talked about organ donations, right? And I didn't understand what they were talking about at that time, but I remember those conversations being talked about. So when I started to kind of read the scriptures and wake up, it was literally like it came into my head, organ donation. So I go on the Watchtower library. I had the disc in my computer, and sure enough, I found the article where they say, yeah, it's cannibalism. You're eating some part of someone's body. This is cannibalism. And I'm thinking, anyone who read that in the late 60s, they'd be thinking, well, then I got to stay away from it. The governing body says it's cannibalism. Who wants to be a cannibal, right?
Yes.
And so I imagine the situation, typically people who need organ donations, typically not everyone, but most of them it's because they're aged a bit and one of their organs is now failing, right? So maybe they need a new kidney because they drank too much or who knows what. And I'm just thinking, you have this hypothetical situation that I'm sure happened. A married couple, and the husband needs, I don't know, a liver transplant or a heart transplant. And they're sitting and they're thinking, well, what do we do about this? Well, let's consult the society. Let's look into the magazines to see what's written on this, right? Because that's what they always tell you to do. When you want to make a decision, you go and you look at what's written before you make your decision. So they get this article like, oh, it's cannibalism. Well, yeah, and we'll be disfellowshipped and we'll lose God's favor if we have an organ transplant, right? So they decide not to it, the man dies, and the widow is like, I did this for Jehovah, to show my faithfulness to Jehovah, because I wouldn't want to, the governing body says it's a serious sin, and I wouldn't want to sin against Jehovah, and me and my husband, we've talked about this, right? So then in the 70s, total reversal decision. You know what? If your conscience allows you to have an organ donation, go ahead. And I'm just thinking, well, it's a little bit late now that someone's dead, and maybe not just someone, maybe there's actually a number of people that have been through this, right? And I'm thinking, again, the governing body is trying to take away people's consciences. They want to make these rules so rather than letting people make their own decisions and face the consequences of whatever decision they make. And it's costing people's lives. And my dad had a conversation with me a while back, and he's like, Paul, why don't you want to come back? You would do such good if you came back. Everyone talks about you since you left. And they talked about all the things that you did while you were an elder in Dominican and this and that. I'm like, Dad, I can't follow men that are telling people what to do in matters of conscience where there's nothing written in the Bible about it. I said, and it's costing their lives. And he said to me, he says, well, what do you mean? And I explained the organ donation just as one example that he could verify in the Watchtower if he really wanted to. And he says, well, I said, can you not realize that because of what they said, there's now a widow who's mourning her dead husband who could be with her still today? And he says, yeah, I see your point, but Jehovah will take care of that. And I said, okay, let's run with that. Jehovah's going to take care of what? That the governing body is blood guilty with respect to this person that died, listening to them, right? And he's like, well, yeah, and you actually have to admit that, they would be blood guilty. If they told someone in a matter of conscience they died, their blood is on your hands. So then I said to him, so then why would I want to follow someone who's blood guilty? and a deafening silence. Like, why would I want to follow someone who's constantly coming out with articles telling people what to do in matters of conscience? And then he says to me, well, people need rules. And this is my dad, who's been an elder for, 30, 40 years. He's like, people need rules. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, you can't keep things organized. People want to have cut and dry answers. They want to have rules. And rules keep order, keep organization. And I'm like, that's not what Jesus taught. Jesus didn't make up a lot of rules. Like, if he wanted to lay something down, he could have made up all sorts of rules, but he didn't. And yet we're doing it. Like, what Jesus didn't do, the governing body's doing. And it's just like, wait a minute, where's our example? Like, are we not going to follow him? And so, that's just a start. But I was going to tell you about this experience in Cuba. So after I was disfellowshipped, out of nowhere came this a job offer in Cuba. So I go down to work for a Canadian company in Cuba, and I'm disfellowshipped. So I had been going to meetings here in Canada. I had actually already asked for reinstatement twice and been denied. Well, I can tell you stories about that. No, seriously, you got to hear my story about my request for reinstatement and what went on. And it might help you maybe if you're developing some videos or something like that. I'm telling you, like, you got to hear what the elders said to me. It was just like, it blew me away. But anyways, I was going to meetings. So now I'm going to Cuba. So I tell the brothers in my congregation here in Toronto, I'm moving to Cuba. I've got a job there. So, if you want to send them a letter, I'll send you an email what congregation I'm in down there when I get there, right? So I get down there. I find the local congregation. And Cuba is poor. I don't care where you go. Everybody's poor. Everybody. Right? Except for, high government officials and military guys, and they just get all the money. So I go to this congregation, and it's kind of like in a brother's house where he made this area for the Kingdom Hall. And I show up with this 4-door giant Chevy brand new pickup. And one guy shows up in his horse, his horse and carriage. And I'm the only one with a vehicle, right? And I'm at the meeting, and I go to a couple meetings, and then this sister shows up one day, and she's blind, and she can barely walk, and she's got no wheelchair. And so I'm disfellowshipped, and I realized, wait a minute, I'm the only guy with a car here. And it's just so happened that after the meeting one day, I see her leaving the Kingdom Hall to go home, and there's a sister kind of walking her along. And they got to cross this, it's like a 4 or 6 lane highway, which is like 60 miles an hour. Like, it's a major interstate. And she nearly gets hit by a truck because she can barely walk, right? And so right away, I go up to the elders. I say, listen, brother, I said, I know I'm disfellowshipped, but this really bothers me that this sister that I just see goes to the meeting. She can barely walk. She's blind. She almost gets hit by a truck. I've got a vehicle. I can pick her up and drop her off. I said, I don't need to talk to her, you don't need to worry about me having contact with her or whatever. And they're like, I'll say, we'll discuss it, right? So they came back to me like, yeah, that's a good idea. So now I'm going to pick up this blind sister who can barely walk, and she's also a widow. Her husband had just died a few months ago, and that's actually why I didn't see her at the meetings for the first little while. So here I am, and I'd have to bring her to me. I have to lift her into the Chevy, lift her back out. And she was so appreciative that she started talking to me. And I tell her, listen, Paula, you're not supposed to be talking to me, man. Like you're going to get yourself in trouble here. And she's like, I don't care what the elders think. And we became friends. So, sometimes when I drop her off, she would have someone making lunch for her. So she'd have them make lunch for me as well, and we'd sit down. And so I started to get to really know her and her situation. And I'd ask her, I was like, do the brothers come by and see you? And she's like, yeah, very rarely, And I'm like, that's too bad. And I didn't want to go any further with that. So then she had a bit of, her family came to visit her and saw that she was living in really rough conditions, and she didn't really have someone taking care of her. So they said, come and stay with us for a little while, and we'll take care of you. And they're not in the truth. Her family, I say the truth. It's not the truth, excuse me, but you know how that expression comes out. Her family were not Jehovah's Witnesses, and so when they came to have her live with them for a little while, it was just a few kilometers up the road, and immediately the brothers and sisters are saying, oh yeah, they don't want her to serve Jehovah. They're taking her away, right? So I don't see her for a couple weeks because she's in a new location. I don't have her phone number. So I said to the elders, I was like, does she need to get to meetings? And they're like, well, she'll probably be going to the meetings over in that other area because it's a little bit closer. And I said, well, if she needs, I'd like to reach out to her in case she needs my help. So they gave me her phone number. I found out where she was living. And so now I hadn't seen her for about 6 weeks. I go to visit her, and I'm like, Paula, how are things going? And she just starts bawling her eyes out. And I said, I said, haven't the brothers been like coming to see you, to encourage you? And she's like, no, only the elders came once, these 2 elders, and it was just to see how I was doing and if I wanted them to move my publisher card over here, right? And so I'm thinking, it was just so happened that the next meeting they announced, it was the service overseer giving that part on, what have we done good in the congregation over the last 6 months, right? And he goes through the report, right? And so he's saying that all the publishers had an average of like close to 20 hours a month, right? And I'm thinking, wait a minute, this blind widow who can barely walk is just living a bit further down the road, and everybody in the congregation found 20 hours to go out in the ministry and knock on doors of people who don't even want to receive them. I says, and nobody has gone to visit their sister, that they would call their sister, who's all on her own now. And I'm thinking, why is that? How is it that everybody finds time to go out in the ministry, but they haven't found time to visit this sister in the last 6 weeks? And then I realized it's because you can't count your time for that.
Time, man. Can't count time.
Yeah, you can't count it. You can't write it on a report that you're going to help a widow. That's not, maybe one day they'll put a box in there, when they get wise to all the complaints about this, right? Or when they realize that widows are being overlooked, they're going to say, brothers, we're going to put a box for helping widows on your field service report. And if they did that, you'd see all these people going out and helping all the old sisters in the congregation, because now they're going to be able to write it on the report. And then I'm realizing it's totally wrong. Like, do you do things just so you can write it on a report and get credit for it? Or do you do it because it's needed? And that was like one of the things that kind of just opened my eyes. I was like, if they put helping widows on the service report, people will be doing it all the time. They're probably doing it more than ministry, right? You probably see all the ministry hours drop off and all the helping widows hours going up, right? Which wouldn't be a bad thing. But it's all because you don't, if you don't get credit for the time, you're thinking, well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to find time for that because I really got to get my time, or I really got to keep my hours up. And, then you have the scripture in James that talks about taking care of widows. It doesn't talk about, placing magazines and placing books. It's about taking care of people, showing love. So that was one of the things. But the other thing I was going to get at, when I was in Cuba, there was this brother. And the way I met him was, I was down there as a Canadian, and I happened to meet this other Canadian lady who is vacation. She spent her winters down there. And really nice lady. I met her through a friend that I made who was an artist. I bought a painting off of him. And when I went to go get the painting, there was this other Canadian lady who was also buying a painting. So then, we got to know each other. And so when later on, she texted me and she says, why don't you guys come by and visit sometime? And so me and my wife, we go and we visit her in Veradero. And when we walk in there, she's made us lunch. And there's a lady sitting there, a Cuban lady, and she's studying a Watchtower. So I'm like, So I was like, oh, are you one of Jehovah's Witnesses? And she's like, well, no, not really. She said, I'm just, kind of studying with them. And I says, oh, really? And she says, yeah, my husband, he used to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses, but that was a long time ago. And she says, I was reading in the Bible and I really liked what I was reading. And, I realized I got to be baptized. And she says, I figure if I need to get baptized, I got to go to at least to some religion so they'll baptize me. So that's why she was kind of studying with the witnesses, because she figured she could be baptized there, right? So we get talking, and she explains in the end that because we offered her a ride home. It was like an 1.5-hour drive. And it turns out that she lived in the town right where we were attending. And on the way home, she explains to us that her husband was disfellowshipped 25 years ago and never gone back. So I was like, oh, I'd love to meet him, right? Like, because I have nothing against anyone who's disfellowshipped. I mean, some of them are better than some of the ones that are in because they've learned a lesson. They're not judgmental, So we meet up with him, and he proceeds to explain that he actually went to prison for his faith, for the neutrality issue. He spent 3 years in prison. And when he came out, something happened. I guess he committed a sin, and he just felt so worthless that he didn't want to do anything. Like he just felt like he was a loser, right? For having committed this sin, right? And basically they disfellowshipped him. And he had been 25 years, never gone back. He had gone to maybe 1 or 2 memorials. So I started talking to him about the scriptures, about Jesus, and just listening to him, right? Like just taking an interest in him as a person. And we ended up talking for like 2-3 hours. I said, you know what? I'd like to get together with you more often because I really like these conversations. And he's like, yeah, me too. I said, why don't you come to my house? I had a house on the beach there. I said, why don't you come to my house next weekend, you and your wife? We'll have some fun. Well, you go over for lunch, we'll go to the beach, chit chat, whatever. So he comes over, and when they come over, their faces are beaming, right? Their faces are beaming, and there are all these smiles. I'm like, well, hey, what's going on? And the wife is like, we got to tell you something, right? And I'm like, what? And I said, well, after your visit last week, Alberto, he was so encouraged by that. And she said, we've been going through a really difficult time right now in our family with our daughter who wants nothing to do with us. And she's a grown daughter. And she said, and so we had this really heated conversation with our daughter, and we were really upset. And she says, for the first time in 20 years, Alberto, lying there with me in the bed while we were about to go to sleep, he said his first prayer in 25 years. And she says, we were crying as he was praying. And I was just like, wow, that's really awesome, And so I would talk to him about little things that was, things that were good in the scriptures that could encourage him. And he was just like, just loved it, right? So what's he do? He decides to start going back to the meetings. now, between you and me, I didn't encourage him to go back to meetings. But in my personal beliefs, it's not up to me to tell someone what to do. They really should examine and then make their own decision. And if their decision is to go back to the organization, well, I got to respect that, right? I can't go saying, what are you doing? Are you stupid? No, it's everyone, I think, really needs to examine all the information at their disposal, make the decision according to where they feel comfortable, and then we got to respect it. So he starts going back to all the meetings, right? And I just kept quiet. I didn't say, what are you doing? I could show you all sorts of things that show you that it's not the truth. But I was just like, you know what? If that's what he wants, okay, if that's what he feels comfortable. So he starts going to all the meetings, right? And the elders are like, why the change? Like, you've been gone for 25 years and we've tried to visit you a couple times. And why are you coming to all the meetings all of a sudden, right? And he's like, well, that brother Paul, he's been studying the Bible with me. And like, well, wait a minute, Paul's disfellowshipped, right? And it's like, no, you got him all wrong. Like, and he's telling me about this conversation, right? So that week, the elders come to visit him at his house, right? And he tells me about the visit, and he's excited, right? Like, I kind of feel bad for him, but I was happy for his excitement. He's like, you know what? The elders came over, he says, on a shepherding visit to me, and they stayed for like an hour. He says, and they even sang a kingdom song with me. He says, and in the end, they said a prayer with me. And I said to him, you know what? That's actually what they should be doing. And I realized is that they were afraid that somehow I was going to have this bad influence on them. And they were probably maybe even jealous the fact that they had no results, because their disfellowship meetings with him were like literally 5 minutes, where you basically read the person, come back to Jehovah, and the door's always open. And now that this brother, finally was realizing that, you know what, he had spent such a long time away from his creator, and his creator wanted to hear from him. And he was all excited that someone took an interest in him personally. He starts, getting all this energy. He's going to meetings. And then the elders are like, what's going on? Oh, he's studying with me. So they do a meeting. And JT, as elders, this is another thing. We're not supposed to pray with someone who's disfellowshipped, right? In fact, you even know how political it is that if you go into a judicial meeting, you open with prayer. But if by the middle of the meeting you've decided that we're going to disfellowship, you dismiss the brother. Now, James says, if there's someone who's sick, pray over him, pray with him. So I'm thinking, if anything, the elders should be praying with this person, right? So here these elders in Cuba, the only time they actually pulled up their pants and took an interest in this brother and actually prayed with him and sang a song with him was after they saw me helping him out. I'm not trying to elevate myself, but I was happy that maybe something got them to realize, wait a minute, we got to do more. We got to do more, because we're not doing anything to help this guy, right? And that's why we had no results for 25 years, right? And if you ask them, they'll probably have some other story to defend themselves. But it was just kind of funny how things worked out. And, I just realized that, you know what, you need to disfellowship someone, you're not helping them. You're not helping them.
That is so true. I mean, these are really good examples and experiences, because I really feel like, a lot of people are going through the same thing. And so as they listen to this, your experiences, they can really relate and probably give them some encouragement.
Well, the thing was, I was like that for a time, because after I had read the scriptures and really seen how Jesus was, and that we're supposed to be like him, and take all these policies out of the picture, I became actually very distracted at the meetings. I was going to the meetings to try and get reinstated, but I'd be reading my Watchtower and I'd be like, no, wait, that's wrong, man. And sometimes I'd even put an X through the paragraph, and then I'd be looking sideways because I didn't want someone else to see that I had crossed out a paragraph, right? Because I don't want to stumble anyone, I don't want to think I'm, ripping up my Watchtower, but I was just like, no, that's wrong. And I'll give you another example. When I was in the Dominican, because after I left my job in Cuba, I went to the Dominican. And I have a house there, and I was finishing the house, and of course everyone in town knows me because I was an elder in that congregation, and I helped form another congregation. So everyone's kind of avoiding me, but I kind of took an interest in those that were disfellowshipped. I actually went around visiting them, right? Because I wanted to see how they were doing. And so I visit this one sister who was disfellowshipped, and she tells me her story that she was baptized. She had been baptized for, I don't know, a year or two. But she had this boyfriend who is, from the past, who actually kind of was like a very abusive and, would kind of have her under control. And she was very fearful. So she had left him to become a witness. And now, just out of nowhere, Jesus says, you know what? I'm coming back home. Right? Because they're living together for something. I'm coming back home. He just moves in. And basically, he was a physical guy, and he would beat her if she said anything otherwise. So the elders somehow find out that this guy's living in her house. So they're like, you know what? You got to put him out. You can't do this, right? And she's like, well, I'd like to put him out, but he'll probably kill me if I try to do it the wrong way. Like, I got to think about how I'm going to do this. Because down in the Dominican, it's a little different. Like, women get beat and nothing gets done. People turn a blind eye. It's only recently that slowly women are starting to have a little more say and the support of the justice system to take a guy to court if he beats her, right? Kind of like in many other countries that unfortunately, women are disrespected. They're treated as inferior. So if you beat a man, it's one thing. If you beat a woman, well, it's not important, So she was dealing with that. And so they call her to a judicial committee because she's got this guy living in her house now. And she doesn't want him to be there. And she said to them, well, listen, he beat me last night and my face is all swollen and black and blue. I can't meet with you like in this condition, right? And so they're immediately thinking, oh, she just wants to hide what she's doing. She doesn't want to meet with us to face the consequences. And they're pressuring her. So finally she goes. She's got bruises on her face, right? And she's saying, listen, you just got to give me some time because I got to figure out the right way to get rid of this guy, right? Because it's not easy. There's a lot of men who kill their wives, and she didn't want to end up dead because she had 3 kids. So they're like, sorry, we can't give you more time. Like, you should know what to do. And she's crying. And one of the elders said to her, oh, those are crocodile tears. Because if you really wanted to please Jehovah, and if you really were courageous, then you'd stand up to this guy and you'd put him out. And I'm just thinking, that's so lacking in compassion. When you're living in a house with someone who's an animal and you're afraid for your life, and you're thinking about how do I do this, especially when the police will not protect you, to the extent they will here in Canada or in the United States. You can get, moved, you can get protection. There's a lot more available to protect a woman if she's been a victim of abuse. Down there, I'm sorry, you're on your own. The only person that'll protect you may be your brothers and sisters, and if they catch him, they'll beat you, which is a good thing sometimes. Teach him a lesson, right? Get someone bigger to beat on him. Anyway, so they disfellowshipped her. They said her tears were crocodile tears, and this is a woman who's going through abuse, and so we would get together and just read a chapter of the Bible together. We actually had a little group, and we'd read one chapter of the Gospels, John 1 and then John 2. We just move on, and we just talk about what we liked from the reading. And she would come to me sometimes and say things that her witness relatives were saying to her. And I said to her, you know what? I said, I don't want you to think that you have to be with us. I said, I've just opened the door for you to be, our friend and whatever. If you really want to go back to the congregation, you're welcome to go back. And she's like, no, I'll never go back. After the way they treated me, I'm sorry, I won't go back. And it was just, each time you hear of someone disfellowshipped, it's true, you only hear maybe one side of the story, but what you do hear is always it's always the same type of things repeating. That you had a group of men that are trying to judge a person, and there's nothing worse, I think, than when you're judged incorrectly. Like I remember when I was sitting in that judicial committee, and they were just like, well, we can see you're repentant, but it's not enough, considering the circumstances, so we're going to disfellowship you. And I'm just like, wait a minute, like, how do they know what's going on inside of me? And then I realized as elders, we didn't know what was going inside of other people. We should have taken their word for it and leave the rest, up to God, But even then, I feel that the whole system is faulty to be judging someone, to have them sit literally in a judgment with judges, because that wasn't, Christ told us, just stop judging. He's the judge. Leave it up to him. Be a helper. Help the person. They feel like garbage. Let them feel like they're gold. You're not excusing what they did that was wrong, but let them know that they have value as a person. Show them love. You can get so much more done with love than you can with fear. And if you do things, because if you put fear into people, then they're doing it out of fear. And then as soon as you're gone, they're going to go back to doing something else. So it's, those are some of the things that woke me up. I mean, I could go on, but yeah, for me, the waking up was just seeing Jesus just as he was, and putting the attention that there was deserved on his words. And the organization tries to take Jesus out and put themselves in that position. All it is a group of people that, I believe are trying to, give God the best to a certain extent, but it's ruled by men. It's directed by men. And I have so many stories to tell you that, just show you that it was men making the decision. Like you said, the man behind the curtain. There was a man behind the curtain making the decision, and everyone's thinking, "Oh wow, oh Jehovah is so loving. Oh, look at this new decision." Just quickly, come on, JT.
That's true.
I'm gonna ask you.
That's true.
Did you ever find it strange that the most important day of the year for the witnesses? What is that? What's our most important day of the year?
I would say Memorial.
Yeah, exactly. Memorial, right? Nothing more important than that. I mean, it's true, Gilly graduation or annual meeting, but really scripturally, the memorial is the most important day of the year, right? And there's all this campaign or whatever. Why is it that Bethelites are working on Day of Memorial? Like that was one thing that would it would boggle my mind. I used to take the day off because I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is the day to remember Jesus' death. And here we are, I'm doing oil changes, like just so you know, I'm a mechanic, right? So yeah. We had elders in our congregation, and they were setting up tents and chairs and getting the Kingdom Hall painted. And then the Dominican is a big thing. They repaint the Kingdom Hall every year just before Memorial, right? So they've taken all their time off, and they're getting everything ready. And here I am doing oil change. So I'm thinking, wait, something's wrong here.
Yeah.
Right? So I started taking that day off. And it was the same thing with Saturdays. We'd be working Saturday morning half day.
Yep.
Right? And I was like, wait a minute, the brothers are in service this morning. All the elders and pioneers and publishers, the congregation is all out in their groups. And here I am doing oil change. Like this doesn't make sense. Like if this is the organization we're serving God, they should be giving us Saturday off for us to be with the brothers when they're preaching. Not that we're doing menial tasks when we could be out there, saving lives and being with the congregation. And I asked myself that question for years. And then finally they make a change that, okay, yeah, we're going to give everybody Saturday mornings off. And everyone's like, oh, how loving, for the body to do that. But wait a minute, how unloving it was for 30 or 40 years that they had it the other way. Like people sometimes forget to think of the reverse. Who was it that had us working Saturday mornings for the last 30 years?
Those are the kind of questions we always ask. We were just discussing the other night about the issue of conscious matter. How we get excited when the society says, you now can make the decision. Well, you always could have made the decision. They just told you couldn't. And we actually believe it. Yep. So many things that became conscious matters. One of the days that kind of caught me when I was in Bethel was I was there during the time that we hit the centennial. And I always thought it was odd that we were celebrating the organization's birthday. We don't celebrate nobody else's. We don't celebrate Jesus' birthday. We don't celebrate your grandmama's birthday, but we were celebrating 100 years of the organization being around. Yeah. It's like a birthday. And it was huge. I mean, it was huge. I mean, they had the guys from all over the branches coming in, and I'm like, this is, and I remember some of the guys we discussed, like, this is really just a birthday. Y'all know that, right? It's really a birthday,
Speaking of 100 years, let me see if you guys perceive this. Did you notice that, 1914, right? 100 years later would have been 2014.
2014.
Right? Did you notice that leading up to the fall of 2014, and it had these release of these new Kingdom songs, and there was all this hype that's going to be 100 years, and there was even a Kingdom ministry that said, this might be our last memorial before the new system.
I used to hate when they did that at the assemblies. Brothers, this might be our last district convention.
So, and the funny thing was, they built up all this hype. They even had on the JW org, what is it, the video website? What's it called again?
JW broadcast.
Yeah, broadcasting, right. So they even had the broadcasting of the Bethelites, the selected singers singing this new song, and it's 100 years since Jesus been king, 100 years, 100 years, 100 years. And they had this Kingdom ministry saying that, and I saw the Kingdom ministry, I had it in my hand, because it was talking about the memorial campaign. And it was saying, brothers, you got to get behind the campaign. This might be the last memorial before the system. And then nothing happens. So then what do they do? The following year, the yearbook comes out. And it's saying 1915, what happened, right? What it was saying is that when the hopes of those that were in the organization in 1914 weren't realized, they weren't taken to heaven and the world didn't end, that 1915 was like a testing year. because, you know, there was all these people that were like, well, it didn't happen. Or
Didn't happen.
Go, right? And it talked about those that remained faithful were blessed. Well, why did they put that in the yearbook in the 2015 yearbook after the year 2014?
Yeah.
Because all the hype they made about 100 years and it being the last memorial,
no meaning.
They didn't come out and say it in paper that, you know, the end's coming 100 years later, but it could, right? Like they gave this hype. And so obviously there were those in the organization that were like 2015. Oh my goodness. You know, I signed up as a pioneer because I want to be pioneering in 2014 when the end was going to come.
Yeah.
And so they came up with this little, I don't know, 2-page, 3-page article in the yearbook to kind of console those people that had got behind the hype, thinking that in 2014 something might have happened.
Yeah.
And nothing happened. And it was basically to say you're of the same group as the 1915 group.
Oh man. The organization will set the stage, and they'll pretend like they're gonna serve, you know, beef Wellington and sirloin steak, and then when you come for it, like when we told you we had hot dogs, that's all we serve is hot dogs. And so people are disappointed, and then they try to blame you for being disappointed about the stuff that they promised. You gotta love it. You gotta love it.
It's amazing. Thanks a lot, Paul. We appreciate
Thanks a lot,
it.
Paul.
Yeah.
Right.
Tell the wife thank you as well.
All right.
Yeah, for sure. Let me know when we can get together again.
Take
All
care.
right. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.